The restaurant is quiet enough that you can hear the ice shift in your glass. You've been here before. Not this table, but this moment. The linen is pressed. The lighting is low. 6 months ago, you would have called this evening a success just by being in it. A woman across from you. Conversation that doesn't feel like work. Someone who laughs at the right time. But tonight, something is different and you can't name it yet. She's talking about her sister's wedding. A story you've heard in fragments before. And somewhere between the appetizer and the entree, she says something. Not cruel, not dramatic, just a sentence, delivered with the particular confidence of someone who has decided quietly that your opinion on the matter is already settled. You'll just do what I say anyway. She smiles when she says it, a small smile, the kind that assumes warmth makes everything land softly. You don't react, you pick up your glass, you take a slow sip. Your jaw doesn't tighten, at least not visibly. But across the table, something in you goes still. Not angry, not wounded, still. The waiter passes. A couple at the next table glances over for half a second, not because anything happened, but because the silence in your corner of the room has a particular quality, the kind that happens when a man is deciding something without deciding anything yet. She keeps talking. You keep listening. And somewhere behind your eyes, behind the composure, a question is forming, not about her, not about the relationship, not even about the sentence she just said. The question is about you, about what you've allowed to accumulate quietly across 6 months of good dinners and comfortable weekends and the slow, almost invisible erosion of the standard you once held without thinking. Most men in that moment reach for an explanation. She didn't mean it. She was joking. This is what love requires. But there's something most men miss in that moment entirely. 6 months is not a long time by any objective measure, but inside a relationship, 6 months is where the architecture settles. The early performance fades on both sides. The effort that felt effortless in the first weeks becomes the effort that reveals whether it's genuine or just the natural theater of courtship. By 6 months, you know what she orders without looking at the menu. You know which conversations she avoids. You know the version of herself she shows her friends versus the version she shows you when the weekend is long and nothing particular is happening. And she knows things about you too. She knows which topics make you lean back slightly in your chair. She knows where your attention goes when you're uncomfortable. She knows, whether she's articulated it to herself or not, where the edges of your standard have softened. This is not an accusation. It is simply what intimacy does. It finds the gaps. The psychological mechanism at work here is not manipulation most of the time. It's calibration. People, all people, move toward what is permitted. If a boundary is never tested, it doesn't disappear. But if a boundary is tested repeatedly and nothing shifts, the other person doesn't conclude that the boundary is firm. They conclude that it was decorative. What makes this complicated for men in their 60s is the specific weight of loneliness, not the dramatic loneliness of movies, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives on a Tuesday evening when the house is settled and there is no particular reason to feel anything except the absence of someone to say a simple thing to. That loneliness, the civilized, adult, never spoken aloud version of it, exerts a gravitational pull on every decision a man makes inside a new relationship. It makes tolerance feel like maturity. It makes accommodation feel like emotional intelligence. It makes the gradual compression of what you expect feel like wisdom rather than erosion. This is where the audit begins, not with her behavior, but with the honest acknowledgement of what you may have been quietly trading away in exchange for the comfort of presence. The audit is not a verdict. It is not a weapon. It is a private reckoning, the kind that requires more composure than walking out ever would. And here is what it asks, at its core. In the last 6 months, have you become less of yourself or more? That question deserves a real answer, not a polished one. Let's be direct about something. The framework of an audit, the language of assessment, evaluation, performance review, can be wielded badly. And a man who wields it badly does real damage to himself, to her, and to whatever genuine connection existed before he turned it into a scoreboard. Not every accommodation is an erosion. Not every compromise is a concession of dignity. There are men who have convinced themselves that the refusal to adjust anything, ever, is a sign of strength. It is not. It is a form of brittleness. The man who cannot bend without breaking is not standing on solid ground. He is standing on ice, very still, pretending stillness is the same as stability. Flexibility, warmth, the willingness to absorb another person's needs without immediately framing it as a loss. These are not weaknesses. In a man of 60 or 70, they are the evidence of range. They are what separates authority from rigidity. So when is accommodation healthy, and when does it quietly hollow you out? The distinction lies not in the behavior itself, but in its source. When you adjust because you've genuinely reconsidered. When her perspective has actually expanded yours, when her needs have invited you to grow a capacity you didn't previously have, that is development. That is what a good relationship does over time. When you adjust because you are afraid of the friction that comes with holding your ground, when you rationalize the silence because the alternative feels like a conflict you don't have the energy for, that is not wisdom. That is management. And a man who is managing his own life is not living it. The audit is not a test she takes. It is a test you take. The question is not what has she done. The question is who have you been in response to it? And that second question requires a level of self-honesty that most men actively avoid. Not because they're cowardly, but because it is genuinely difficult to look at the man you've quietly become and compare him to the man you intended to be. A real audit is not a list of grievances. It is not a mental courtroom where you build a case. It is a structured examination of specific, observable patterns, conducted privately, without agenda, with the discipline to distinguish between what you feel and what is actually happening. There are 5 domains worth examining with honesty. The first is presence, not hers, yours. Are you fully present in the relationship, or have you been performing presence while something in you has already stepped back? Withdrawal is sometimes wise and sometimes cowardly, and you need to know which one is operating before you can evaluate anything else. The second is reciprocity, not a transactional ledger. Relationships die when reduced to arithmetic. But reciprocity, broadly understood, is the signal that 2 people are both contributing to something neither could build alone. It doesn't require symmetry, it requires genuine mutual investment. If that investment has become one-directional in either direction, the relationship has already shifted into a different shape than the one you agreed to enter. The third is your private narrative. What story are you telling yourself about the relationship when no one is listening? Men who are genuinely well matched to their partners don't tend to need elaborate explanations for why things are fine. If the private story requires constant maintenance, if you're regularly constructing justifications for dynamics that trouble you, that maintenance itself is data. The fourth is your baseline. Before her, what was your standard for how a woman spoke to you? How your time was respected? How disagreement was handled? Compare that standard, honestly, without nostalgia, to what is currently in operation. If the gap is significant, the question is whether it shifted through genuine growth or through the slow accumulation of unspoken concessions. The fifth is directionality. Is the relationship making you move toward the version of yourself you respect or away from it? This is the only question that ultimately matters, and it is also the one most men refuse to ask because the answer has consequences. The audit is not designed to produce a breakup. It is not designed to produce a confrontation. In many cases, the honest completion of it reveals that the relationship is solid, that what felt like erosion was actually integration, that what felt like compromise was actually growth. But in some cases, it reveals something that has needed attention for months, and the courage to see that clearly, without drama, without blame, with the measured composure of a man who understands that clarity is not cruelty, is the specific form of strength this stage of life demands. What you do with the findings is a separate conversation. The audit is only about arriving at an accurate picture. Return for a moment to that restaurant. The sentence has been spoken. The smile has been offered. The silence has settled into the corner of the room where you are sitting with your glass in your hand. Imagine 2 versions of the man in that chair. The first version swallows the moment. He laughs, not because it's funny, but because laughter is the fastest exit from discomfort. He moves the conversation forward. He files the moment somewhere internal, in the long folder of things that didn't quite sit right, but weren't worth addressing. The evening continues. The relationship continues. And somewhere in the space between that moment and the next 6 months, something in him continues to compress. The second version does something much quieter and much more difficult. He doesn't react. He doesn't perform patience. He is actually patient because he has already decided that this moment will receive his full attention later, in the privacy of his own honest reflection. He stays present through the rest of dinner. He is warm, he is composed, he does not store resentment, but he does not pretend the moment didn't happen. And in the days that follow, he examines it without rancor, not as evidence against her, but as an invitation to understand what the pattern beneath it might be telling him. Whether it tells him to have a direct, calm conversation, whether it tells him to re-establish something he let drift, whether it tells him that he is, in fact, overreading a single offhand remark. The second man is not harder, he is not colder, he is clearer. And that clarity, the unperformed, unannounced, privately maintained clarity of a man who knows himself well enough to notice when he's drifting from himself, is the specific quality that distinguishes authority from dominance, composure from suppression, and self-respect from pride. This is what men in their 60s and 70s carry that younger men genuinely cannot replicate. The lived understanding that how you manage the interior of your own experience is the actual measure of your character. Not the victories, not the resume, not the performance of confidence, the interior work. A relationship at this stage of life is not a romantic accessory. It is a co-authored document, one that either reflects the man you have built over decades or quietly begins to rewrite him. The difference between those two outcomes is not determined in dramatic moments of rupture or triumph. It is determined in the quiet, repeated choices to remain honest with yourself when dishonesty would be more comfortable. Legacy, in the truest sense of the word, is not what you leave behind when you're gone. It is the standard you maintain while you're here, in how you move through a room, in how you receive disrespect and respond to it or don't, in whether the people who know you closely can sense, beneath the warmth and the humor and the relaxed confidence, a man who has never fully abandoned the version of himself he decided to become. That man, the one who conducts the quiet audit, who holds the honest mirror, who makes decisions not from fear of loss but from loyalty to clarity. That man does not need to announce his standard. It is simply visible. In the way he sits at a table, in the questions he asks, in the moments he chooses not to explain himself, in the relationships he maintains, and in the ones he eventually, calmly, without bitterness or performance, decides to leave behind. So here is the question to sit with tonight, alone, without the noise of an immediate answer. If the man you were at 40 could observe the way you've navigated this relationship, not the highlights, but the quiet daily choices, would he recognize you? Not as a challenge, as an honest inquiry, because the goal of the audit was never to judge the relationship. It was always to return you to yourself. The man who knows who he is doesn't need the world to confirm it. He only needs to keep checking.